I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 299. And today in the show, we're joined by Adam Hayes to dive deep into his tactics for consistently locating the best buck in the neighborhood. And welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Onyx. And today I'm joined by Adam Hayes, and we're focusing specifically on the topic of finding the best buck in your area. And Adam seemed like the guy to talk about this topic with because he does that year after year after year. Now, shooting a big buck is not all that hunting's all about. It's not for everyone. It's not something you got to do. But for some folks, those who seek the greatest deer hunting challenge possible, the goal of finding and hunting the biggest and oldest buck in your neck of the woods is this task, this mission that can be incredibly rewarding and frustrating. But somehow, Adam seems to do it with ease. Now, you might be familiar with Adam from his appearances in various magazines or his show, Team 200, or from the fact that he's pretty widely known as one of the few people out there who have killed 4 free-range whitetail bucks that eclipse the magic 200-inch mark. So needless to say, he's got a lot of experience finding and targeting bruiser whitetails. And today, I picked his brain for every single idea, tip, and tactic I could possibly find that he has for how to find those kinds of deer, how to locate the best buck in whatever area you might be in. We discuss that, and we break it down how to do it in the winter, in the summer, and in the season. So, without further ado, let's take a really quick break, and then we'll get to my chat with Adam Hayes. And hey, one more quick announcement for all of you guys out there. If you are into whitetail deer hunting, which if you're listening to this podcast, you sure ought to be. Otherwise, you're in for a boring conversation. If you're into whitetails, we are just launching a new newsletter from MeatEater that is all focused on our latest and greatest whitetail hunting content. It's a spot you can sign up and get all of our whitetail stuff sent to your inbox every single week. It's called Whitetail Weekly. If you just go to themeateater.com, you'll see a little pop-up that's going to show you how you can just enter your email address, enter to get that. You're going to see the new Wired Hunt podcast show up there. You're going to see our new Rut Fresh Radio podcast. You're going to see our new video series we just launched called How to Kill a Buck. Have a whole other video series coming very soon that's whitetail focused, and a whole bunch of articles focused on our favorite big game species, the whitetail deer. Content from me, Spencer Newharth, Tony Peterson, Pat Durkin, and all sorts of other folks that love whitetails just like you and I. So head on over to themeateater.com and sign up for the Whitetail Weekly newsletter. All right, with me now on the line is Adam Hayes. Welcome back to the show, Adam.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I just was looking back on the archives to see when we had you on last, and this is crazy to me, but it was 4 years ago that we did that episode. It does not seem like it's been that long at all.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I know. That is that is the truth. So I'm glad we're finally circling back again. And speaking of having fun, are you having a good late summer, early fall period? Are you getting excited for the season to kick off here soon?
Yeah, I am getting excited. This summer just flew by and got some good deer on camera, so I'm anxious to get after them.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And speaking of those good deer on camera, that kind of ties into the main focus area I thought we could try to dive into today. I know last time we chatted, it was kind of a holistic view of everything you're doing to target big old bucks. And today I thought we can narrow in to one slice of that, which you seem to be particularly good at, which is locating the best buck in the neighborhood, like finding that very biggest, oldest buck in whatever neck of the woods it is that you're in. And then you just zero in on that deer and you seems to be that you're getting within range of that deer more often than most other people out there. So I thought we could dive into all facets of that. So everything from, preseason work and scouting all the way to what you're doing in season, everything from actual hunting to trail cameras to whatever else it might be. But I got to ask, you alluded to it. You've got a couple good bucks on camera. Do you have a couple of these bucks in your sights already that you think are going to be the target for this year yet? Yeah,
I've got a couple target bucks. I've not seen a deer that I thought was pushing 200 inches this year, but one deer in particular I've been chasing for 4 years at home, and big deer over in Illinois I've been after for a couple of years. So it's what it's all about with me. I'd rather be chasing a specific animal than just out there deer hunting. That's really what drives me these days is, having some history on a deer and trying to figure it out and playing that game with them as opposed to just sitting there hoping a big one's going to show up.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm right there too. So how does that process start for you? Let's say the 2018 season ended, 2019 has started. When you went into this year, let's look at this year as a perfect example. How did the process start for you as far as trying to either relocate a buck you knew from past years or find whatever that buck will be, a new buck might be this year? When did that start? What's it start looking like? Is it right away in the postseason, or do you wait till the summer? How do you start locating that deer?
It's really important to get out in the woods before things start greening up. I mean, a lot of guys get out shed hunting, and I do shed hunt. I'm really looking for, antlers off specific animals, though, as opposed to just out combing the woods looking for a horn here or there. But it's a great time to get out and really, everything's kind of really laid out for you. As far as the previous season, obviously rubs, trails, scrapes, that sort of thing. But the main thing I look for late season like that when I'm after a specific buck are the core areas, areas where those deer spend the majority of their time in October, especially, thick bedding areas that are going to have concentrations of large rubs. Because, getting after a specific deer, I like to get after them in October, obviously before the rut, when they're still pretty predictable and on a set pattern, doing pretty much the same thing every day. But you've got to know, right where those deer are bedding, and food sources are pretty obvious. But early season, they're doing the same thing every day, and some guys struggle with killing deer then, like during the October lull, because those deer are doing it the same thing but in such a small area, and it's tough to get into those spots without tipping them off. You usually get one crack at them and then it's game over, or things get a lot tougher. So that's really what I focus on that time of the year, is finding those core areas where those big deer are bedding. Early season, they're doing a lot of rubs, and everything's pretty much right there laid out for you to find late season.
So what, let's say it's a property that you've hunted in the past. There's a buck that you think made it to the next year. Now you're out there in January or February or March, whatever it is, and you're looking for these core areas. once you find a spot you think is his core area, or maybe in the past, like you've hypothesized that, hey, I think this buck is hanging out in this little zone. What are you really trying to do then at that point? If you know that one of these pockets is one of his little core bedding areas, do you go in there and try to actually take it even further and say, okay, I know this is a zone, this 5 acres or 15 acres or whatever seems to be his core. Do you go in there and try to precisely pick, I bet you he beds in this exact spot some days, I bet you he beds in this exact spot some days? Or do you try to find exactly the routes you think that deer's coming in? Or what are you actually doing when you're there on March 1st looking at the core area?
Well, it's really all the above. I mean, you got to have a really good idea where he's bedding at. And it's really a matter of almost, thinking like the deer. So if you know where he's bedding, you know where the food sources are and where he's going to want to go. Number one, what travel routes is he going to take to get there? And probably the most important is what kind of wind is he going to need to feel safe enough to get up and move during daylight to get there? Because my whole regimen is all about finding a weak spot somewhere on that travel pattern where you can get within bow range of him while he's using the wind to his advantage. Because a 5, 6, 7-year-old buck in October is probably just going to lay there in his bed until dark unless he's got a few things in his favor, particularly a good wind, weather influences mature deer to move, and obviously the moon too. I'm a big follower on the moon, and when you can line a few of those things up, it's that's when you catch those big deer making mistakes. But it's really about, just like I said, trying to think like the deer. What's it gonna take for that deer to feel comfortable to get up and move, and finding an ambush spot along there while he's using the wind to his advantage. And those spots are tough to find. It's hard enough to beat a big buck's nose, let alone giving him the wind. But that was really what changed my success on big deer, was when I quit hunting winds that were good for me and started hunting the wind good for the animal I was after.
So is it fair to say that you are looking at a property and you're kind of finding these core areas, and those core areas kind of become like a hub on a wheel, and then you're trying to guess where are the spokes coming off of the wheel that are these travel routes out? So do you end up having different places you hunt that have then these different little wheels? You've got a core area here and a couple spokes coming out, and then you've got another core area somewhere else, maybe it's a different buck, and a few spokes. Is that kind of what your maps in your head look like when you're thinking about breaking down these properties?
Yeah, because they're not going to be heading to the exact same place every day. They're pretty consistent early season, but food sources change almost daily in October, with crops. The soybeans change from, being green to drying up, and they switch over to the acorns when they're dropping. And if a cornfield comes down, they jump on that right away. So, stuff's changing nonstop. So there's going to be multiple routes a big deer can take. So that's where your in-season scouting comes into play a lot. I probably scout more than I hunt during season also, because you got to be on the freshest sign. That stuff's changing, like I said, almost on a daily basis, and you got to stay on top of that stuff. But then again, that also causes its own set of problems and issues, trying to get in and keep an eye on fresh sign and how things are changing without disturbing the deer. So you really got to have an intimate knowledge of where that deer is bedding at, where you think he's going to go as the crops and food sources change. And it's just, it's just a combination of a lot of things that go into play.
It's a huge puzzle. Now,
yeah. It's a strategic nightmare.
But that's what makes it fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I do want to talk about all that in-season stuff for sure. But before we get to that, one more question on this, winter scouting of these, starting at these core areas, finding then the spokes along the way. But what if it's a new property and you don't know where these certain bucks are typically spending their time? So if you're brand new on a spot and you're now walking around and you're trying to determine where is this best buck living, a lot of people say, well, there's certain places I think the bucks should bed. Like, there'll be good thick cover. And then, so if you just go to the good thick cover and you say, okay, this has got to be his core area, this has got to be his bedding area because it's good thick cover. But but maybe there's 4 bucks living around there, and one of them maybe is using that one. And is that the best one? Is that the oldest buck? Is that the biggest buck? Like, how do you actually go about determining where the king of the hill is living? Is it just by rub size, or is it a concentration, or is it, how do you go about and actually say, okay, this little area here, this is the big boy, I think, or this is where he's spending the most time? How do you actually make that qualification?
I probably rely on concentrations of big rubs more than anything. But, on any given property, there can be, multiple bucks in multiple areas that they use. So unless you actually witness firsthand, a deer making rub, it's hard to know for sure. But, I use a lot of mineral sites in those locations year round to keep tabs on the bucks and to know which areas that they're using. I love to set my mineral sites right on the edge of those core areas where, whether a buck's traveling through an area or, going from his summer pattern back to his core area when he sheds his velvet, typically they'll hit those mineral sites and I'll know when they're there. And, it's a good idea to put them right on the edge where you can get in and get out without disturbing those areas. But that's a great way to keep tabs on them, to know which deer are living where. And you got to cover on a new farm. You got to cover every stitch of cover that's available, because, a big deer could be using a typical, flat in the middle of the woods as his core area, or he could be using a little tiny thicket right up next to the road. You just never know where these big deer have little pockets that they've found where they've learned to survive. An older guy I know that's hunted longer than I've been alive told me one time that if you've gone more than 100 yards from your truck, you probably went too far. So I don't skip any patch of cover when it comes to figuring out, where these big deer are hiding at, and especially on a new piece, you just got to cover everything that's available to you and what you got permission on, because you don't want to miss anything.
Yeah. What about scrapes? Big hub type scrapes. Some people like to really focus on those scrapes that are back in the cover, and they use that to kind of focus in. Do you pay attention to that sign at all when doing this early, post-season type stuff in the winter still? Or is it just rubs and other sign like that?
No, I pay a lot of attention to them. It seems like the bigger, larger breeding scrapes, so that's, those are the ones that you're going to want to pay attention to in November. And I normally don't find those on those isolated, buck travel patterns. Those are more typical for, all your does and all your bucks are hitting them in a real common area, which is where you want to be in November. But when I'm after a specific buck, I like to try to kill them in October, and that's typically not the kind of place we're going to find them. But you definitely want to note those areas, for November action, that's for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's move the clock forward a little bit. Now it's the summer. It's July or August, and you kind of made a comment a second ago that makes me curious about what you think about summer scouting, because you said something about how these bucks move from their summer patterns to their fall patterns. So, right, a lot of us talk about the fact that you're going to have these deer in one place in the summer, and then some significant portion typically shift their range to a degree once velvet comes off. So how do you look at your summer scouting, your summer trail camera pictures, your summer beanfield scouting, when you know that a lot of those deer are going to be somewhere different in a few weeks?
Well, it's just something you got to keep in the back of your mind, and that's when that late season scouting comes into play, because these mature deer are usually going to be located next to a preferred food source in the summer, whether it's, a really green soybean field, alfalfa, whatever the case is. And who knows why they pick a specific field. But, I've seen them here in Ohio where deer don't travel a lot, relocate a mile or 2 miles away in the summer. And then, they're out there like clockwork all summer long every night. And then all of a sudden they vanish.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of guys have problems with them. They don't know, what happened and where they went. And a lot of those bucks, when they shed their velvet, they automatically relocate back to those core areas that I try to find late season. But, the only thing the only thing definite about hunting big deer is nothing's ever definite. Some of those big bucks might stay right on that food source right in through October. If the beans were planted late and they're still green, they could stay there. I've seen that happen before. If there's a good oak drop in the area, they could stay right there or relocate, to a different spot where they're dropping. But typically September, when they shed, there's a lot of stuff changing, and a big deer could stay right where he's at, or he could completely vanish and relocate. But 9 times out of 10, when they do that, they're going back to that safety area. They know what's going on, they know what's coming, and things are changing, and it's time to get reclusive again, and that's normally where they end up.
Yeah.
And that's when those mineral sites come into play, and having a camera on them, monitoring them, so I know when they vanish from that summer pattern, they'll usually show up on those mineral sites.
Yeah, so tell me a little more about your mineral site trail camera process. So you're putting these spots on the edge of the core area. When you say the edge of it, are you saying it's on the edge of a field so you can drive right up to it, or are you actually back in the timber but you're on the edge of the transition between like a staging area and the good thick cover? Like how close to the edge are you really?
When I say edge, I'm talking about somewhere where I can get in and out and check it without disturbing the deer that I'm watching, but close enough to him that he's going to find it, and it's going to have to be on his travel pattern. When he comes through that area, I don't know, it seems like more and more these days of finding these big mature bucks, they just don't seem to venture off their set patterns, and go out of their way to find stuff. So you've really got to be either right on it or close to it for them to find it or to pay attention to it or to hit it consistently. So as close as you can be to their core area, on the edge, so you're not disturbing anything if you have to go in and replenish it or change batteries on your camera or whatever. And a lot of times I hunt really close to them too, so I don't want to go busting through the brush to get into a tree stand. I love just being able to slip right just inside the cover, not disturb anything, jump up in a stand if a big deer starting to hit a mineral, which they don't a lot of times in October, but if he's making a mistake, you got to be able to slide in there undisturbed and take a crack at him. So,
yeah. So, what's your trail camera setup over those? I'm curious. Do you put them way high in a tree and aim it down because you're worried about the buck spooking through the camera, or do you just place a camera at eye level? I'm curious what your whole detailed setup for those cameras, those stationary cameras where they're over a mineral site or something like that.
Well, most of those are there year-round, so the deer get used to them, and I haven't had a need to, hang them 10 foot up in a tree or anything like that. I've not noticed where they really disturb the deer I'm after, and like I said, because they're in there all year, they get used to them, so just a typical setup.
Okay. And are you running cell cams nowadays? Do you run just traditional cameras? And if so, how often are you going in there to check them at this point in the year at least?
When I'm in close to a core area like that, I use the cell camera so I don't have to go in there and check them. I probably run about 15 of those, and then everywhere else is just standard cameras that I bounce around from spot to spot. But those cell cameras are worth their weight in gold, especially during season. So any of my, kill spots that I'm actually hunting and think that's where I need to be, I'll definitely have a cell camera in there. So,
okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say we're in that late summer time period or early fall, like right now, it's September, early September. You're waiting to get some of these bucks on your camera, on your trail cameras. Let's say you get a ping, you look at your phone, it's September 6th, and here's the big shooter buck that you've been hoping to see all year. He's on camera just outside of one of these core areas. At that point, do you just let it be and keep your cameras all where they were at because you want to keep track of what other deer might be around? Or do you go and grab some of your other cameras that were elsewhere and then zero in on this spot now that your target buck's in?
Yeah, it's too late in the game to make a lot of changes right now. So the less pressure, the better. It's all about the element of surprise and going in the first time. And I mean, a deer that's survived for 5 or 6 seasons, you just can't make any mistakes. Not early season. And like I said, this time of the year, they're doing pretty much the same thing every day, but they're doing it in a really small area. And if he's in there and you catch him moving during daylight, I don't change anything. I mean, unless something absolutely has to be changed. I want to stay out of that area, let him feel as comfortable as he possibly can, and then wait till I stack the deck in my favor with everything possible to get him to move during daylight as soon as I can slide in and take a chance in killing him. Because if I took the 10 biggest deer I've killed, I bet you 9 of them were killed the first time I went in. You know, I think a lot of guys struggle with the fact that it's hunting season. I got to be hunting, which is understandable if a guy can only hunt, you know, a couple of days a week or weekends or whatever. You know, guys want to be out there hunting, but I don't go through all the work and scouting and effort to go in before everything's lined up and take a chance on blowing him out. Because, like I said, it gets tougher each time you go in there and don't get it done. So you really got to be patient and just wait for everything to line up before I even take a chance on going in. And 9 times out of 10, it works if you can do that, if you can stay out of your area till everything lines up.
So before we get into the season, one other thing, I know we talked about this a little bit when we chatted last, which was this idea that sometimes a lot of folks will just focus on hunting whatever bucks they have on their property that they've always hunted or whatever, but that you sometimes will actually go out there in the summer or off season or whatever it is and seek out these top tier bucks, glassing fields and looking all around. And then when you see a buck that you really want to target, then you go about trying to get permission to hunt there or whatever it takes to be able to hunt there. So I guess question number 1 is, do you still do that? Question number 2 is, if so, do you do that in the summer or do you wait till early September so that you know you're in the spot that buck's going to be during the fall?
That's really getting to be the toughest part of the game anymore, is finding quality deer that you can actually hunt. You know, and being able to find one, I mean, there's lots of different ways to find them. You know, I follow up on every lead I hear about on a big deer. You know, I do a lot of glassing in the summer, you know, shed hunting new properties. I'm a real estate agent, so, you know, I'm looking at properties all the time. You know, just any way that you can, you know, get a lead on a big deer, you got to follow up on it. You know, I like to focus on sanctuaries or areas that don't get a lot of hunting pressure, or areas next to sanctuaries are good places. I mean, here in Ohio, I think just about any buck has got the genetics to be a trophy. He just needs time. So in order for him to get the time to grow to be, you know, Boone and Crocker or 200-inch deer, he's got to have a safe spot. So, you know, anywhere where you can get next to or on a spot that has minimal or no hunting pressure, you know, those are the spots I focus on trying to find a new deer per se. But yeah, I think probably the best times to really locate one is in the summer.
Yeah.
When those deer are a little bit more relaxed and out in the beans in the summer. And tell you that though, there's not even a mature deer is not out there every night. I've noticed that quite a bit in the last 10 years with more guys out scouting in the summer and pulling off the side of the road. Those big deer don't like to be seen even in July and August. And there are certain nights that I focus on in the summer to increase my efforts and success on seeing those big deer out in the fields. Cause I don't have the time, you know, to be out there every night in the summer like I used to be. And there are certain nights that are better than others for catching those big deer out in the fields.
So are you looking at the same types of factors like the moon and temperature and other weather, stuff like that, to impact deer movement that we look at in the season? Is that the same stuff you key on during the summer for your scouting?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not so much the wind in the summer, but definitely the weather and the moon. You know, when you get the cool evenings or an evening when it rains and then the sun comes out and you got some moisture on those plants, deer just come out of the woodwork. And then, of course, the moon. In the last 20 years, I've just seen it happen too many times when that moon's peaking in the evenings. Especially the mature deer seem to show up early. And that's really what I've focused on for, 15, 20 years now for those bigger animals, trying to locate them in the summer.
So those deer, though, you find in the summer, let's say you did this. You went out there, you scouted near some different little sanctuary areas. You found a buck you're really interested in. It's August, though. You glassed him in a bean field. He was out there every other day through all of August, but now it's early September. And maybe, did you go and you ask on every property nearby, and maybe you got permission on one of them or two of them, but now it's September, and you're trying to decide, okay, are they still there? Are they still around, or was their fall range somewhere totally different? How do you try to verify that? Is it just what we talked about earlier? Did you go and put a camera out, and now you're waiting to see if the camera starts popping in September, or is there something else you do to try to verify, is he here?
It's a shot in the dark when you catch one in the summer because you didn't have a chance to do your postseason scouting to know where his core area is. So you don't know if he does vanish or he's going to relocate to. Really, the best thing, for catching a big deer in the summer and you find one out in the field is just, I call it summer observation, and that's getting up in a tree or, in a truck from a few hundred yards away and keeping an eye on the area with a spotting scope and just not tipping that deer off, because you bust one in the summer like that and pretty much most of the time he's going to be gone. So, get permission on any adjacent spots that you can. And the last thing you want to do is bust a deer like that. So just keep an eye on him from a distance. Try to, through aerial photographs and some low impact scouting, try to figure out what he's doing. But that's a completely different game, when you find one in the summer when you got nothing other to go on other than just seeing him out in the field. That can be tough.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co, and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
So what about a situation where, what if this is actually happening right now? You just got permission in late August. It's a week later. It's early September. You've done the truck observations. You sat on a hill with a spotter. Would you risk going in and doing a walkabout still at this late in the game with your season opening 4 weeks from now or whatever? Or would you say, no, I'm not even going to walk in there once. I'm just going to start hunting, run and gun, once the season starts. I don't want to muck it up at all. How would you think about things 1 month out from the season now?
Man, you got to handle it carefully, and it's going to differ from one scenario to the next. But one deer comes to my mind. I was chasing a giant 8-point, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and he was camped out in a really small soybean field, and it was just surrounded by a couple fence lines and a ditch, little wooded creek line. And I'd been up in a tree a couple of times, and I saw him moving across the field, and I knew the direction he was heading in the evenings, but I had no stands in there. So I waited till I got a good wind. I knew that deer was not going to wind me out in that field during the day. Had a good rainy day, put some rubber boots on, got all cleaned up, put a stand on my back, and I basically walked that creek line up to where I thought he was entering or exiting the field, and hung a stand and killed him the second week of season, coming through the beans and heading in that same direction. So it's a matter of watching them, seeing what they're doing, not alerting them to what you're doing, and just really being smart about entering and exiting the property, making sure you don't tip them off, being really clean, and going in with the stand on your back, minimal disturbance, and sometimes even a hang and hunt.
Yeah.
If you don't have the opportunity to get it done beforehand, you might have to put that stand and sticks on your back and go in and hang them and hunt the same evening.
Right. Is any of this process different on properties? So we started there, and then we went to this new property example. But now let's go back to a property you do know. You've hunted a farm year after year after year. You get a big buck that shows up on your camera on your mineral site on September 5th, let's say. Once your opening day is approaching, do you still try to get some nights to do some observations those last few days or the last week? Are you still trying to do that? Or do you know these spots well enough that it's just better not to risk it at all and just wait till that right time to hunt?
I love to have things preset, weeks or months in advance, but that's not always the case with things changing. With a food source changing or hunting pressure or whatever, stuff can change at the last minute, or, you might have a new buck show up on your property. But regardless, you got to be ready to change it up at a moment's notice. And even on a property that if a big deer you're after or a new one shows up in a specific spot during daylight making a mistake, you got to be ready to dive in and get it done. And one of the biggest deer I ever killed was a deer I knew about. And after all the post-season scouting and summer scouting I did on that property, I couldn't find that deer to save my life. And I kept doing my distant scouting observation stands. Finally saw that deer show up mid-October one evening out in the middle of the field. I was a few hundred yards away. He had no idea I was there. Sat that field for the next week. He didn't show back up, and then cornfield on the end of the property went down. He popped out one evening with the does, and I didn't have anything set up in there. So the next evening, I went in with a stand and sticks on my back and hung on the edge of the field. And at dark, right before dark, he stood up about 80 yards away and ended up killing him. So you got to be ready. You got to be ready to hang and hunt or change things up at a moment's notice, even during season.
Right. It seems like as much work as you do in the off season, being able to stay on top of the recent intel is just as important to flesh out that full picture.
Yeah. Yep.
So you mentioned observation stands. So we're in the season now, let's say. We've done this postseason scouting. We monitor our areas in the summer, trying to glass fields. We had mineral sites out there that were getting pictures of bucks. But now the season is opened. I know a lot of people go in there, and actually I'm going to take what I just said back. Let's not talk about observation stands yet. Let's first talk about opening night. Do you oftentimes go in for that opening night kill like a lot of people do, or are you still playing it safe in trying to use your observation, watch, and then zero in on them. What does that first night look like for you? Because that can be tough to have the intel to dive right in and go for a kill the first night unless you can see them from the road or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I know what you're saying. And just because it's opening night doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go in. I'm not going to go in unless I've either seen that deer making a mistake in daylight, or I've got a few things on my side that makes me believe that that deer is probably going to get up and move, and that's got to be, a good wind for him, a good weather condition to prompt that deer to get up and move, or the moon. And anybody that knows me knows I've followed the moon for a long time, and unless there's a couple of those factors, the wind, weather, and moon lining up, chances are I'm not going to go in unless those things are on my side, because you just can't go in and not get it done early season, because that deer is going to end up picking up on you. You see you, smell you, hear you. If you don't kill them, catch you coming out after dark. I mean, I want to kill that deer the first time that I go in, so I want to stack the deck in my favor and make sure I've got the moon pushing him to get up early, some kind of weather condition that's pushing him to get up, the wind in his favor so he feels safe enough to move. I want all that stuff lined up before I dive in. And, I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm saying. I pay attention to the moon, but if it's not a good moon evening, doesn't mean I'm not hunting. If it's opening evening and I don't have any of that stuff going on, I might be 300 yards away in another tree stand watching that area, or maybe on a different property with another deer. I'm still out hunting, but if I know where I need to be to kill a specific deer, I want as many of those things in my favor as I can before I'm going to take a chance to go in and try to kill that deer.
Yeah. This big Ohio buck that you've got on your radar this year, you said you've been hunting him for 3 or 4 years. Is that what you said?
Yep. Yeah.
Do you have a game plan? Like, do you already know in your head, I think I'm going to kill him in this spot and I'm just going to wait for the right time to do it? Or are you going to be trying to figure that out in the coming weeks?
Having 4 years of history with him, I do have a couple spots that I've kind of, set the trap and have them prepared, and going to wait for, specific scenarios before I'll go into those spots. But then also, there's other places on the farm where I think I could kill them. Just all depends on the deer. You do everything you can to prepare yourself and kind of try to predict what you think is going to happen. And sometimes that's the way it happens. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes, the deer changes something up or does something completely different. I mean, the only thing definite about hunting these big deer is nothing's ever definite. So prepare for what you can and be ready to do what you need to if things change up.
Yeah. Walk me through this scenario then. If you don't mind, let's use that big Ohio buck as an example. Let's just say hypothetically that the first few days of the season go by and you don't have great conditions, so you're not really diving in there for him. It's October now. How are you going about hunting him with, I know you've talked about observation stands in the past. Can you just expand on that a little bit, how you use observation stands to try to locate and zoom in on where these deer are and what they're doing?
It's a location or a tree stand that's outside of the game, where I'm 99% sure the deer's not going to pick up on me coming in or leaving, and where I've got really good visual opportunities to catch, to get a look at them moving, making a mistake, watching them come through CRP, watching them go through the food plots. I've got trail cameras on all those spots where I think I might get an opportunity to kill him. So not only am I going to be able to catch him coming through those areas on camera, but if he happens to skirt a camera, if I'm in an observation stand, I might be able to pick up on that. But, I know how that deer moves through the farm, where I've seen him in the past, his history is, coming through the plots that I have set up, the Whitetail Institute plots, right on those red moon evenings. I mean, he's been really consistent on that. It's just a matter of where he happens to be bedding at and how he gets to those spots. This deer in particular beds in like 6 different places, so it's really hard to tell where he's going to be coming from. So that's another thing to try to key on these observation spots is, where they're coming from and what they're doing. I mean, you're just looking for little pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah. So you're up in the tree, you see the buck. I'm imagining you see him. You're thinking in your head, okay, where'd he come from? Where is he headed? But what are the other things that are running through your brain as you're trying to analyze? Like, you just had this observation. You just got this piece of the puzzle. What are all the things that you're trying to dissect from this piece of the puzzle? Because I imagine there's a lot of stuff you can glean from this 10-second observation possibly. What's Adam Hayes trying to get out of that?
It's really pretty simple. How can you use that information to kill that deer immediately? That's when when you see him doing something, see him making a mistake, you gotta react and you gotta kill him immediately. You don't wait for it to cool off. You don't go in and hang a stand and give it a couple of days. I mean, you gotta go in and get it done. So just trying to take that information and use it to figure out how to kill that deer as soon as possible, because things are changing way too much and you just never know what's going to happen. That's when you got to get aggressive and go in and get it done.
If you observe a deer, then let's say it's October, you see a buck do something, are you going to go immediately the very next sit, like the next morning? Or are you going to wait for the next evening? Or are you waiting for the next time the wind does the exact same thing? When you say go as soon as possible, what exactly do you mean?
As quickly as you can get in there without disturbing the deer. I don't do a lot of morning hunts in October. I like to know those deer are bedded when I go into the farm, and beating a big buck into his bed early season when he's on a strict feeding pattern is next to impossible early season. If I'm going to take a chance and I've tried a few evenings to kill him and I can't get it done, and I know right where he's bedding and I've got a stand ready, or I know the tree I need to be in for a morning hunt, I'm going to wait till I get a good moon just after daylight. Seems like that's your best chance to catch him coming back just a little bit late in the mornings during early season. But, you just can't go stumbling right in just because you see him do something and not put any thought into it and ended up busting him and ruining the whole, clue that you just got on what he's doing. I mean, you got to be smart about it. Can't tip him off. So you got to keep the wind in your face. You got to keep your as much of your scent eliminated as you can, not leave anything behind. And, you can't go in and clear out a tree like the utility company just came through. I mean, you gotta go in and do it smart.
Yeah. Now, does that change at all though during the rut? Because I have this internal dilemma myself, right? If I see a buck do something on October 1st, I feel like there's a decent chance he might do the same thing October 2nd, because it's still relatively early. He's in that somewhat of a bedding to feed pattern that's going to be hopefully kind of consistent. But if I see a buck do something on November 2nd, hell, he might be 2 miles away the next day, or he might have just been passing through here behind a doe. If you make an observation in early November during the heat of the rut, do you still make a move on that observation, or are you going to say, that was probably random?
I mean, what do you got to lose, at that point? If you see him do something one day, why not take a chance on him doing it again the next day?
Yeah. So you go for it. You make that move.
You might as well go for it. If you got nothing else to go on. I mean, we're not recreating the wheel here. If you see a buck make a mistake, whether it's in October or November, you might as well try to capitalize on it.
Okay.
I definitely want to be there if he does it again, because if not, it's my mistake.
Yeah. That's the worst feeling too. If you sit there and you debate back and forth, I know because I've done this. I've debated back and forth, and I'm going to wait and see if he does it twice, and then he does it twice and I'm not there. That'll stick with you. All right. Can you elaborate just a little bit on how you're going in season and doing these hanging hunts? Because you alluded to the fact that you have to be able to set up in a way that you're not going to spook that deer, of course. You can't clear out like a utility company. But for those that aren't already doing this kind of hanging hunt often, it might be helpful just to hear your specific process. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, do you go in there with 3 sticks or 4? Do you trim any lanes at all? Or do you just sneak up as quiet and don't touch a thing? Like, your entire process would be kind of interesting just to hear how you're actually getting set up uptight to one of these spots in season. Is it only for evening hunts, or do you ever go in 2 hours before daylight and try to do something in the morning like that?
That's tough to pull it off in the morning in the dark. Yeah, I don't do that very often at all. I'll tell you a trick I did learn, though, from Andre DeQuisto, the original owner of Lone Wolf Tree Stands.
Mm-hmm.
He'd go in and set up for an afternoon hunt. And then if it didn't pan out, he might dive right back into that same stand the next morning. And I found that, carrying all that equipment in, stand, sticks, bow, plus all my camera equipment, because I'm filming myself, that it's a lot easier to go in and hunt an evening and then just leave everything in the tree. I mean, leave my bow hanging, leave my ozonics hanging, camera set up, everything's ready to go. Just climb up and you're all set. And I do that a lot for morning hunts. But it's difficult early season to do that, and you can't do that with a lot of with every tree stand on the market. And I've used Lone Wolf stuff forever, and being able to go in and hang stands and a stick within 100 yards of a 200 class whitetail and not tip him off to your presence is next to impossible. But I've been able to do it with their stuff, so can't say enough about their equipment and the stealth and quietness of their products. But yeah, putting that stuff on your back, not touching anything, being extremely scent free with from my gear to my clothes to my body, and then when you go into a spot like that you might not have been in before, you never know what's going to show up on your downwind side. So I'm not going into those spots without my ozonics. You just got to cover all your bases and be prepared for everything. And I do minimal trimming. I don't worry about taking 5 or 6 sticks in on a spot like that and being 30 foot up. I hardly ever hunt that high anymore. I'm more concerned about being in the right spot and having a little bit of breakup. And it seems like sometimes the higher you go in a tree, the more you actually stand out. So I'm just concerned about being in the right spot, not leaving any scent behind, and being as quiet as possible.
Do you have a consistent process of how you get up in the tree quietly? Because this is something I've asked a handful of people about recently. I've just been trying to make my hang and hunt process more efficient and quieter and faster. And so I've started, using a couple different gear ties to tie 2 of the sticks to my hip. So I put 1 stick on the tree, I climb up, pull the 1 stick off of my hip, put on the next one, climb up, pull the other one off my hip, climb up, and then I have I've got a tow rope down to my bow and a tow rope down to my stand or platform. And once I get up to my top position, then I already have those ropes on my hips and I just pull each one up. I don't have to go up and down at all. That's something that I've just been slowly kind of working on to try to make it more efficient. Do you have a system in place?
I've tried that, and I haven't found anything that works for me. No.
It's definitely,
I tell you though, it makes a big difference. Yeah, it makes a big difference if you can obviously undo all your straps before you climb up into the tree, so you're not messing around with all that stuff. And I use that sound barrier tape and a lot of camo hockey tape on all my buckles and straps and stands. I mean, I pretty much eliminate any metal to metal contact on everything, so that it only takes one little ting from a buckle hitting your stand to tip a big deer off that might be bedded close by. So I mean, you got to cover all your bases and not leave anything to chance. But yeah, I I love to have a tree with a lot of limbs so I can hang my sticks on the limbs as I'm going up.
Okay.
So I don't have to keep climbing up and down. But I haven't been able to come across anything that really works good for climbing up and keeping all your sticks on you. You know, trying to hang on to the tree and grab your sticks. It just, it's tough.
It's a process. What about this scenario? Let's say you're going to go in to do a hang and hunt. Maybe you saw a buck the night before, or maybe you just you want to head to a spot. You're walking in, and as you're walking in, you see some great sign, fresh sign that looks like it just happened. Maybe it's a huge rub that just got tore up a couple days or just a couple hours ago or last night or something. You see something that catches your eye. I'm curious, would you say, I need to hunt this right now and change your plan and hunt that fresh hot sign right now? Or would you say, well, I'm going to put that away in the filing cabinet, keep that as some intel, but I'm going to stick with my plan?
It just depends on the situation. And, like I said, I do everything I can to hunt the freshest sign. So you definitely got to take it into consideration, but you got to be able to read the area and, read the deer and what he's doing and why he did it, which direction he's coming from, and just so many things come into play, and being able to read it and look at the big picture and see what's going on. I mean, you love to be able to set up over top of a freshly steaming scrape or, a rub that just reeks because it just got shredded by a big deer, and be right on top of it. But it's really about, looking at the big picture and why it happened and why it's right there and, the best way to approach it. So it's tough to kind of wrap all that up in one sentence and say what to do.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, then explain this to me. What would it take? Like, can you imagine a scenario like that would force you to hunt right then? Like, is there one specific instance? Like, I might be able to imagine in my head if I didn't have a really great game plan for the night. I didn't see a buck the night before, but I knew I wanted to try a new spot, and I'm hiking into that new spot, and I see this, like you just described, I see this huge tore up rub, and it's stinky, and it's obviously, it wasn't there yesterday maybe, so I know it happened between last night's walk out and this afternoon walking in, and I also know that I'm in a typical transition area, and the wind's right for me to hunt. If a buck were coming out of the bedding area I was heading towards, he might pass through this spot. That scenario maybe to me would say, okay, you know what? This is a spot a mature buck might likely come through, and it looks like there was a buck that just came through here last night doing that very thing. This seems like a good thing to set up on right now. Is that the kind of scenario that you might jump on that hot sign right away, or what's a different scenario maybe that would cause you to hit it immediately in that way?
It's tough just going by sign because you don't know if it was made in the middle of the night, So what happens if you find that fresh, hot sign and you set up on it, but everything's not lining up for that deer to move during daylight? So you hunt there, you don't see him, you get down after dark, and you bump him going out because he's still moving after dark.
Yeah.
There's just so many different scenarios to think about, but sometimes you just got to go with your gut, and if it seems like a good thing and fresh sign and a great evening and you got to stand on your back, why not take a crack at it?
Yeah.
It's hard to compartmentalize, something like that and say this is exactly what you got to do. Sometimes you just got to go with your gut instincts and do what you think's right. But the main thing I'm looking for is other than sign is to catch a mature deer doing something during daylight. Because I don't care what you say, there's just no way to kill a big deer unless he's moving during daylight. Sounds oversimplified, but that's really what it's all about. So I do everything I can to catch a big deer moving during daylight, whether it's seeing him from an observation stand, catching a picture of him doing it, or, like I said, just lining up multiple factors that's going to put everything in that deer's favor to get him up moving early. because we're trying to predict what he's going to do before he does it. And if you got a good wind for him, got a good moon, it's pushing him up, and it's Mother Nature. It's an instinctive urge for him to get up and feed. And then you've got a weather pattern that's, high barometric pressure or a cold front or something that's going to push him to feed. I mean, those are the things I'm trying to line up. If I'm just going in blind, hoping that I'm going to catch a big deer making a mistake, I want those things in my favor.
Yeah. Do you ever find a situation where you don't get eyes on a mature buck? Like you don't have any observation sightings of a deer you want to shoot. You don't have any daylight trail camera sightings of a buck you want to hunt. And you find yourself in a position where you have to, in season, actually go walk and look for a sign to help put you in the right position? Or is there always going to be one of those other pieces of intel so you don't need to actually do a walkabout of any kind?
Yeah, I've been there before. The last thing you want to do is spend, a week or two in October in a completely different spot. And if you got nothing to go on, no pictures, no sign, I mean, what are you going to do? Climb up in a tree and just hope something shows up? I mean, you got to go find them. So worst case scenario, if you got nothing to go on, then it's time to get the wind in your face and stand on your back and start cruising and looking for something to hunt. I mean, you don't want to spend a couple of the best weeks of the season in the completely wrong spot.
Yeah.
So I'm not one of those guys that's just going to climb up in a tree and just hope something shows up just based on the fact that there's a big deer in the area. You got to have something to go by. And if I don't have anything to go by, I'm going to go find it.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild. But searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
We talked about rubs already, and a little bit about scrapes, but what about tracks? How much do you pay attention to trying to find a big buck track, and does that ever kind of factor into your decisions or into your scouting and use that as a piece of the puzzle at all?
Very seldom, to be honest. I mean, I've heard so many different explanations of tracks and track sizes and the dew claws and if they're spread apart and how to tell a buck from a doe. And I mean, see a big deer track means there was a big deer there. I mean, I've never put a whole lot into tracks, to be honest.
Okay. What scrapes though? We talked just a little bit about it, but what kind of scrape in season would you need to see to get excited? A lot of people see these field edge scrapes, But then there's the talk that that's probably nighttime. So then some people prefer scrapes in other locations. Where's your head at on scrapes when you're actually out there during hunting season, and how does that factor into things?
It really doesn't matter what type of sign it is. If it's, tracks and trails, rubs, scrapes, whatever it is, you want something that's fresh. But the key that I'm looking for is a mature animal making that sign during daylight. So I'm either going to have a trail camera on the trail, on a scrape, on a rub, get a look at that deer, see what it is and when he's doing it before I'm going to hunt it.
Okay.
I want some documentation. I'm not gonna camp out on a rub that a big deer I'm after might not have even made or ever visited.
Do you look at a daylight trail camera picture the same as a daylight observation? So we talked about the fact that if you saw a shooter buck in daylight moving, you would go in there and hunt him as soon as you possibly could. Would you do the same thing with a camera? If you got a daylight picture, you're moving in and hunting that camera location as soon as possible?
Yep.
Yep.
He's still moving during daylight. That's the main thing.
Yep. Where do your cameras typically go in season? I'm guessing that you switch them from your summer locations, but is that true? If so, how?
I've got them monitoring those mineral sites back in the cover. I've got them on the food plots. I've got them on the rub lines. I mean, anywhere where I think I'm going to get a picture of that deer moving through an area that's going to help me know where he's at and when he's there. Okay. It's all about, the particular animal and where he's at and where I think I need to be to kill him. Yep. I have a lot of cameras set close to tree stands because I want to know when he's passing my tree stand in daylight. So you need to have a camera close to that stand on the trail.
Do you do anything to try to get better camera pictures, or do you place any kind of a tract in front of most of your spots to try to get them to stop there, or use licking branches or anything at all on those typical camera sets?
I'll use some scent occasionally to get them to stop. Like I said, I do have a lot of them on mineral sites, so they're going to be stopping anyway. Or putting them on, like a rub or a scrape. But you do want to put it somewhere where you got a pretty good chance of that deer stopping, yeah. You don't want to put them perpendicular to your trail because I think you end up missing, pictures of deer coming through. You want to catch them coming towards the camera or going away from it instead of just, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Passing by perpendicularly.
Yeah. You want to get a little bit of an angle so that they're not just going to flash in and out of it immediately.
Right. Yep.
How many cameras are you typically running, or how many do you think, I guess let me rephrase the question. A lot of people wonder how many cameras they might need to effectively cover a certain area. So maybe let's start small. Let's say per 40 acres, if we think that maybe that's like a small property a lot of people maybe can access. How many cameras per 40 acres on average do you think would be good to get a solid idea of what's out there? Is it one camera? Obviously it depends on how many you can afford and how many you have.
It might be one. It might be one. It might be 20. It depends on the property. Just being able to read the property and know what's going on and how the deer use it. Sometimes you can know if a deer is coming in and out of a property with one camera. Sometimes it takes multiple. I'm hunting 250 acres where that big deer is at, and I think we got 15 cameras on there, but I want to know, exactly when that deer comes in and off the property and where he's at. And I've got it wired for sound. So it's just all about being able to read the property. And, if you've got one specific area where the deer come in and out, it might only take one camera.
Right. That scenario with that big buck, again, that we've been talking about, how do you think it's going to play out? I'm curious to hear if someone put a gun to your head and said, Adam, you're going to kill that big buck. We think you're going to kill that big buck this year, but we want you to guess the scenario of how it's going to happen. You're forced to pick the spot you're going to hunt. You're forced to make a guess on where he's bedded and where he's coming to. You're forced to pick the night or the day or the condition it's going to happen. Walk me through your very best guess of how it's going to come together and what you would have done to make that happen.
I've got 3 spots in particular that I have ready for that deer where I think I'm going to, if I get a crack at him and an opportunity to kill him in October, it's going to be in one of those 3 spots. It's going to be on an evening where, he's got a good wind in his favor to feel comfortable enough to get up and move. That deer has been notorious for showing up in my food plots on the red moon evenings from the moon guide. So it's going to be on a red moon evening. And, knowing when those days hit this month, going to have 3 opportunities in October this year, beginning of the month, middle of the month, and the end of the month. And I think one of those 3 times is probably when it's going to happen if it happens.
And those red moon days, just for those if you're not familiar with the red moon theory, we talked about it quite a lot in our other episode we did together. So definitely listen to that whole one. But can you give us just the quick cliff notes by what that means and how you're looking at that, just for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, so I've been using the moon guide for 20 years, and it's just really it has nothing to do with the phase of the moon. It's about the position of the moon in the sky and the gravitational pull and how that affects mature deer to move, because you only have a handful of days each month when that moon is peaking at prime time in the evenings. And it's just another thing added to the wind and the weather to push that deer to get up and move during daylight when he's normally not going to do that. So those are the evenings I focus on. And like I said, anytime you have multiple factors like the wind and the moon, the weather and the moon, or all 3, it's about stacking the deck in your favor. It's, putting everything in your favor that you can do. And, after using that moon guide for 20 years, I've just seen it happen, and I've killed too many big deer that just normally don't move during daylight, but you killed them right when that moon peaked in the evening. It's not a gimmick. I mean, it's Mother Nature. I didn't invent the moon. The moon and the gravitational pull is strong enough to move the oceans, the biggest mass on this planet. You cannot tell me that does not affect animals and fish to feed. I mean, I don't think we've even really scratched the surface on how the moon affects animals and people and everything on this earth. But, I've read all the research. I've heard all the guys talk about the moon. Data doesn't support it affecting deer. I'm just not buying it. Not until somebody goes out and radio collars a bunch of mature deer and falls them during season and proves to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that it doesn't affect them. Because I'm going by what I've seen in the last 20 years, and I've killed a lot of big deer focusing on a lot of scouting, knowing my areas, and waiting until the wind, weather, and the moon is on my side. And most of the time, I'm able to go in the first time and kill them if I can wait for that stuff to line up. So if somebody wants to argue with me on a better regimen, for killing big deer, I'm all ears. But I'm just going by what's worked for me, and that's worked for 20 years. So that's what I focus on.
Yeah, well, I can't argue with it. I know that I've seen a lot of the same research that has shown what you said, that the moon doesn't have a statistically significant impact according to some of these studies. And the same things, though, have said that cold fronts don't impact deer movement and other things like that so many of us can point to as there being changes. So I've always said that it just seems like what they're measuring maybe is not the same things that we care about as hunters. So total movement over a 24-hour period, maybe it's not any different. But I don't care about total movement over a 24-hour period. I care about, is a buck over 4.5 years old going to walk this extra 50 yards 10 minutes earlier? And if he's going to do that, that makes all the difference in the world for me as a hunter. Maybe that's not significant enough to show up in these large-scale studies, but that's the kind of thing that can make a difference to a hunt. So I've always thought, I feel like there's something like being lost in translation there. That would be really interesting to see if we could somehow measure what the hunter would be impacted by. That'd be really interesting to me. So I've always been game to pay attention to all of it. And like you said, I don't know how important any one of these individual factors is, but I'm going to stack every one that I can together, because you need every little bit, every odd possible in your favor, because there's already so many things out of your control. Why not take advantage of those things that you can?
Exactly. And I'll tell you a great way to measure it. I see it happen every year. You watch social media in October, and every time that red moon peaks, there will be guys posting pictures of big deer that they're killing right on the red moon, regardless if they follow the moon or use the moon guide. It happens every year. Now, it's not 100%. You know, guys kill big deer on days that aren't good, you know, a good moon. I mean, nothing's 100%. But every time that red moon hits, I guarantee you'll see a spike of big deer hitting the ground right on those red moon days.
Yeah, I think last year wasn't one of the red moon time periods that, like, October 24th, 25th, 26th, somewhere in that ballpark. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Because I remember a whole lot of deer got killed right around that time period, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it lined up with those red moon dates, and that was something that a couple of us were discussing as pretty interesting to see, that there was this very, very high peak, like more noticeable than usual even. So it's interesting. It's definitely something I like to pay attention to, and I'm intrigued.
Why wouldn't you pay attention to it? Guys pay attention to the weather and Mother Nature, but not the moon. I mean, what's the difference, you know? The moon is a satellite for Earth and affects this Earth in so many different ways. Well, why would you focus and be, you know, have blinders on to just concentrate on weather and then throw the moon out the window? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I'll take it all.
Yeah. Why not stack the deck in your favor?
Yeah. So speaking of stacking the deck, I want to dive a little further into your scenario, though. So we're waiting till one of these ideal sets of conditions, hopefully a red moon and good weather, or the moon and the wind, or whatever it might be. But you've got 3 different spots you think it could happen. Could you describe one of these just to help us understand, like, what kind of setup you have in mind to kill a big buck? Like that kind of example, I think, would be really helpful for people.
Yeah, so I think this deer normally mostly beds in 2 places. One is right behind the farmhouse, actually, in an overgrown backyard, basically, or in a CRP field up close to the road along a little creek bed. And that, you know, it's on the most downwind side of the farm, which is very typical for a mature deer. In Ohio, we normally have a southwest wind, and 9 times out of 10, a mature buck's going to live on the most northeastern part of the farm. So whenever he gets up, you know, he's mainly going to be on the most downwind side of the property and can go wherever he wants to with the wind in his face. And that's what this deer is doing. And there's a cornfield he could hit up close to the road, which I saw him do last year. I've got two secluded food plots, the back end of the CRP that he hits, and then another cornfield corner in the back of the property that he hits. So in his travel pattern right through the middle of that block, he can hit, you know, any one of those 4 spots. You know, I've got stands in all 4 of those spots ready to go. You know, when he shows up normally in any of those spots, it's always in the same spot. So, I mean, I've got everything prepared. I know how to get in and out of the farm without tipping that deer off, which, you know, was a big learning experience for me, because that deer bedded in so many places, and most of the time he was bedded close to the road and knew exactly when I was there, and I couldn't figure it out. You know, he'd show up for a day or 2 on camera during daylight, and I'd go down and try to hunt him, and he disappeared. That deer knew when I was there. He was watching me come in and out. You know, that deer, I parked within 10 yards of that deer one time. Didn't even know he was there until I got up on my Ranger to pull it off the trailer, and he jumped up in the middle of the guy's backyard. Wow. You know, in 6 foot tall grass. I mean, So it's been a learning experience. But
so what do you have to do to adjust that access point? Do you just find a totally different side of the farm you can come in on, or what have you done now?
Yeah, I just had to come in from a completely different spot on the farm, not the typical spot where I come in. I can't park at the house. I can't park at the pull off where I normally come in. I basically got to park right off the road and go down the road and come in around the backside on the Quiet Cat and do a complete loop around the farm so that deer doesn't know I'm there.
Wow. What about a scenario like this where, and this is maybe a little bit of a stretch from the theme of locating deer, but bear with me here. You're out there hunting and you don't have anything to work with, let's say, or at least nothing recent. Do you ever go to the idea of blind calling to try to locate a deer? Will you ever be in a situation where, like, damn it, I just got to start rattling a lot and try to pull something in or grunt because nothing's showing up, and I need to force the issue? And I know this is time of year dependent, but how often does that ever factor into your thought process?
I'll do blind calling in November, but I really don't like to do it earlier when I'm after a specific deer because I think calling success really depends on your setup, you know?
Can you elaborate on that?
Mature deer is gonna try to get downwind of you or come in from downwind of you when you're calling. And my setups, I like to put myself in a spot where either a big deer can't get downwind of me, or if he tries to, my location that I'm set up in forces him within bow range to try to get downwind of me. I mean, I think it's deadly to be set up early season within earshot of a big buck in his bed and do a little light calling while he's still laying there to give him something to think about and a direction to head once he gets up. You know, I think there's a little competition in his area and something's going on and he needs to get up and check it out and investigate. But, yeah, it's tough to be successful on blind calling. But, I mean, in November, you know, it's all about time in the stand and bucks are cruising. You never know when one might just be just out of eyesight that hears your calling and responds to it. So
it all of a sudden can come together in those kind of scenarios.
It's all about the scenario. Yep.
Do you ever get to the point where you're in season and you have to rewind all the way to the tactics you were using in the summer? So by that, I mean you get to the point where you have to pull out of your hunting locations completely and get back on the road and glass fields from the road again to try to find a buck. Like in November or late season, maybe deer have all shifted again and you're trying to relocate where these bucks are feeding. Do you ever go to that extreme?
Yeah, sometimes you have to. If they disappear or buck you're after got killed, or, I mean, gosh, there's hundreds of different scenarios where things change up and you got to change your tactics and go back to square one. But, you know, you've only got a certain amount of time to get it done. So you got to do whatever it takes during season.
Yeah. I liked what you said earlier that sometimes, or correct, maybe clarify this, but I think you said something along the lines of you scout more than you hunt, even during the season. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate as far as spending those times observing from a distance or doing different things to just narrow your hunts down? I've been slowly moving more and more that direction, that I'd rather have a lot of information that leads me to a few really, really good sits. I'd rather have that than a bunch of sits that are just kind of willy-nilly.
Yeah. I read a story by Miles Keller years ago that talked about hunting from the outside in, and what his whole thought process was is he would start from the outskirts of a buck's territory and just keep classing and monitoring the area from a distance and just methodically keep moving in closer and closer and closer until he knew the exact tree he needed to be in and the exact wind the deer needed. And, you know, I really kind of adapted that over the years into what I do. And, you know, it's all about hunting and hunting and hunting and hunting, scouting for that, you know, that one spot to kill them, you know. So I really think it is a lot more scouting. When I say hunting and scouting, kind of talking about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Until you find that kill spot, you're actually hunting for that kill spot, I guess is a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
You're hunting for that, special spot, that weak spot, or that place, that A spot where you can kill a deer. So I guess that's really the best way to describe it, is I'm constantly hunting and scouting for that perfect spot to kill the deer that I'm after.
Yeah.
Because once you find it, once you find where you need to be and you wait for everything to line up, you go in and kill them.
How often when you have that situation, like what kind of confidence level do you have at this point in your hunting career and journey? What % chance do you feel like when you find a spot like this that you feel good about and the conditions line up and you're going for your first sit? Is it like a 50-50 proposition for you? I know we're just ballparking here, but what do you usually feel? Like, are you so confident you've got this narrowed down so much that 7 times out of 10 you're getting it done now?
9 times out of 10.
Wow.
That's what it's been with all my biggest bucks.
So what about
if you do all the scouting to find the right spot, and you can be patient enough to wait for everything to line up, and you haven't alerted that deer to your presence, and he's still moving on his natural pattern, and he's got all those, natural instinctive pushes to get him up moving. I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
If you do everything right. So
since we talked last time on the podcast, you killed your 4th 200-inch plus deer. And that buck, as I understand it, there was a little bit of this kind of scenario that we've been discussing. It took some working to locate him with cameras and then some observation type stuff. Can you walk through that example, how you located that buck, how you narrowed down where the spot was and where the weak spot was, and how you ultimately killed him? Could you kind of walk through that?
Well, it was in Kansas. It was in an area I was familiar with, but I hadn't hunted that specific farm yet. But we had a camera in there on the middle of the property, and that deer just showed up out of nowhere, 3rd week of October, middle of the night. Didn't figure he was living on the farm. The farm was located in the middle of a block, about 2 miles long and a mile wide. So I had a pretty good idea he was living on that block, but not on the farm. But he was coming through there just keeping tabs on does. We had food out in front of the camera, obviously, to attract deer there to get pictures of them. So I was a couple of weeks away from the next red moon, and with him moving in the middle of the night, I wasn't in a rush to run right out there, although I knew it was a 220-inch giant. So just kept monitoring the camera, obviously a wireless camera out there, so I knew what was going on. Started really studying the aerials of the photo of the property, and there was really only a couple spots where I thought a deer like that would be coming in and out of the farm, so I knew what I needed to focus on when I got out there and where I wanted to look. So the moon was supposed to peak sometime the end of the 1st week of November. I believe I headed out there on Halloween day, full day drive. Deer was starting to move a little bit closer to daylight, but still, after dark, but not middle of the night, getting closer to evening. Got out there, it was super hot. Knew deer weren't going to be moving much. I went into the 2 spots, actually the 2 back corners of the farm that looked like typical areas where deer would come in and out. The camera was set up in the middle of the farm, so I didn't know where exactly he was coming in and out. But one spot really looked to me like it was the spot. I mean, it was back corner, very secluded, really low, really, really secluded. Creek running through there, multiple fence lines crossing. I mean, just like a hub of activity. Deer could come from any direction. And the key to it was there was a really deep creek bed that ran the distance of the property right back to that corner. So I could literally jump down in this creek that was like 10 foot deep, but it only had a couple inches of water, and get right into that corner without making any noise, without disturbing anything. I really figured that was my best chance of killing that deer in that corner. So got in there, hung a stand, really didn't know, like I said, what direction he was coming from, because they could come from so many different directions. So I really had to rely on being clean and counting on the ozonics to cover my downwind side. And it was one of those spots where, you could get in and out of there day after day and not really worry about spooking anything. So I think I hunted that spot 3 or 4 times that week. I did hunt the other corner a couple times, but I just wasn't feeling it over there. I knew my chances were going to get better later into the week as the moon got closer and closer to prime time. It didn't really cool off a whole lot. I think it was like 75 degrees on that Saturday when I finally killed him, but it was an hour and a half before dark, really hot. Wasn't even expecting anything to be up and moving yet. And that deer shows up in the broad daylight on my downwind side, of course. Thank God the ozonics was running. And, I killed the biggest deer of my life when there was no rhyme or reason for that deer to be up and moving that early on the, I think, 5th or 6th of November. He's just up moving, doing his thing, moving into the wind, had the wind in his favor. The moon was peaking that evening. And it was just one of those things where you read the sign, you just kind of look at the big picture. What's a big deer need to do to move through this property and feel comfortable enough to move during daylight? And I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, that's just the way that it happened. And ended up killing the biggest deer of my life.
That's amazing. Now, you bring up something that I think is worth expanding on, which is, this buck did what he thought he had to do to be safe or something along those lines. And this brings to mind an idea that we hear occasionally that, a mature buck is almost a different animal completely than all the other deer out there. And one of the things that helped me a lot at some point in my deer hunting journey was I used to just be like trying to hunt deer. And I would set up in spots where I could see a bunch of deer, but you were never actually getting a shot at a mature deer. Once you realize you have to switch and start hunting this totally different animal, then you have to think about things in a different way, and you start hunting different places or hunting closer to these places, but in a different kind of way. So all that is to say, what are some of the other things you found that a mature buck does differently or that you're thinking about when trying to guess where he's going to move or how he's going to move? You talked about this area being a hub and all these things going for it. I imagine you were seeing some of these things and you thought to yourself, because of this, or because I know a mature buck likes this kind of thing, or a mature buck tends to move in this kind of way, this is the spot. Are there any things like that you can speak to that come to mind that are unique to how a mature buck travels or thinks or acts?
The only thing I really think that is unique about it is the majority of the deer, and they are a different creature. And the majority of the deer in the deer herd are going to be doing the same things that he's doing. They're just doing it more consistently during daylight. And a big old mature buck is still doing the same thing. He's just doing it on very specific days during daylight. Those big deer just don't make mistakes, and they just don't move that much during daylight, or they die. They've learned what they need to do to survive, and the unique thing about it is when they do it, they do it for very specific reasons during daylight. And then, I don't think it's rocket science, and I don't think, a 200-inch animal is any different than a mature 150, but I do think a mature animal that's learned the game of survival is doing things differently just from the sole reason that his main goal is to survive, and he's not going to make any mistakes. So you've got to really hone in on not only what he's doing, but when he's doing it. It's all about timing. The timing is really the key to it. when is that deer going to do it during daylight so you can kill him and not tipping him off before you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, getting those high-quality hunts, getting a couple high-quality hunts just seems to be so much more important than a whole bunch of cruddy
It's
ones.
it's all about quality over quantity, hunting smarter, not harder.
Yep.
November is when you want to hunt harder. There's guys that deer hunt, and then there's guys that hunt specific deer. When you're hunting a specific deer, you've got to hunt smarter, not harder.
Yeah. Is there anything that we've missed when it comes to this specific idea of locating them, of zeroing in on them? I feel we covered a whole lot of different facets of it, but is there anything that's still jumping around your mind that you think that'd be horrible if we left it out before shutting things down here?
I don't know, man. You've been pretty thorough on picking my brain today.
I tried.
I don't know that we missed anything.
Okay. Well, in that case, where can folks find a couple things? Because you're doing a lot of really interesting things out there in the deer hunting world. You're producing content. You're putting out the Moon Guide out there in new ways. Where can people find everything that you've got out there?
Oh, Team 200 is everything content-wise that we're doing. 200inch.com is the website for the show. You can catch it on Waypoint TV, which is a free app. Runs on the Pursuit channel. We got a lot of great content on the show. And then as far as the Moon Guide goes, moonguide.com. We just launched a new app. You can get it on the Apple Store or Google Play, searching Deer Hunters Moon Guide. And you can get either of them from the website. So
perfect.
And then, of course, social media, Team 200 TV Facebook page and Moon Guide Facebook page. So
awesome. Well, I just got to check out the Moon Guide app, and that's really nice having that right there on your phone. There easily shows the moon rise and set times, the sun rise and set times. I like the fact that you guys then call out the peak activity times and where to focus. So for anyone that's intrigued by the moon theories, if you want to learn more about that, I know, Adam, you've got a whole lot of different videos and you talk about it in your TV show, but we also dove into it in a lot of detail on that previous podcast, episode 2. And, it's very interesting, intriguing. I definitely follow along, and I keep it as one of those tools that can help guide me when I need to know a little bit. Just like you said, all the little odds you can stack in your favor. When you're trying to pick that right time, I'm going to consider every factor. So it's something I'm looking at, and I appreciate it. So thank you,
no problem,
Adam.
man. Glad to help.
I think a lot of folks are going to learn something from this today, and the only downside is that there's probably going to be more big deer hitting the ground, which means fewer for you and me in the future. But we appreciate you sharing all your experience, Adam.
No problem, man. Appreciate you having me on the show again.
All right, and let's talk sooner than 4 years from now, okay?
Yeah, let's do that.
Sounds good. All right, good luck hunting the rest of this season.
You too, man. Thank you.
And that will do it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Lots of great info and ideas from Adam. And man, if you're not already hunting, it is almost here. So get ready, get excited, and until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.